Hello and welcome. This is Camille Fairborn from Michigan State University, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Cause Teaching and Learning webinar. This webinar is the 200th Cause webinar since the series began back in January of 2006. Dennis Pearl did a little digging for me and told me that the first webinar was done by Jack Miller, who was the first host of this series, and they introduced the new webinar series and described how to submit items to CauseWeb in that first webinar. And the second webinar was by Webster West, where he talked to us all about StatCrunch. So that seems kind of a long time ago. We're pleased to have as our presenters today Dr. Beth Chance, who is a professor at Cal Poly, and Dr. Nathan Tintle, who is a professor at Dordt College. By way of trivia, Beth has done 4 Cause webinars and Nathan has done 3. And 3 people, Larry Lesser, Jennifer Kaplan, and Dennis Pearl, hold the record jointly for doing 6 webinars each. So that's our trivia for today. For today's webinar, Beth and Nathan will give a presentation entitled Statistical Thinking in Undergraduate Biology. The way the webinars work is that all listeners are muted during the webinar. You can ask questions at any time by typing them into the questions box. We'll be sure to ask those questions towards the end and give the presenters a chance to respond. You can also use the chat box if you're having any technical questions. So at this point, I'll turn things over to Dr. Tintle. Nathan, go ahead.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity to present here in this 200th webinar, and thanks for inviting Beth and I back for our 3rd and 4th webinar presentations. I didn't know that either, so thank you so much. As Camille said, we're going to talk about statistical thinking in undergraduate biology courses and a new initiative that we are leading, a network, and so we'll present for a little while here about the motivations for what we're calling the STUB network, Statistical Thinking in Undergraduate Biology, a little bit of the goals of that network, and then some of our initial activities, including some summaries of some different things we've done, some lessons we've learned, and then some next steps. You're welcome to ask questions as we go, but we'll have that set aside time at the end for questions from all of you. So I'm going to sort of kick things off here and share for a little while at the beginning, then we'll turn things over to Beth. She'll share for a little while, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So a little bit of the motivations for this STUB network, Statistical Thinking in Undergraduate Biology. The practice of biology is really becoming very quantitative, as so many disciplines are in this age of data. And so the question is, as the practice of biology has become very quantitative, how does that impact the teaching of biology? And how will it include data-informed and statistical thinking? And a number of reports, especially those within the last decade or so, have sort of started tackling this question and anticipating sort of the issue of what are we going to do with statistical thinking and data in undergraduate biology. As of a few years ago now, the undergraduate biology curriculum does include explicit learning objectives around descriptive statistics, and in particular the chi-squared test of significance in Bio 101 or the AP Bio equivalent. And about 1.2 million students a year in the United States now are learning some statistics in their biology courses, in particular with descriptive statistics and chi-squared test being a couple of the most common learning objectives there. But what we've noticed is that despite all of this sort of momentum, using data more and more in biology, more and more students starting to see statistics in their biology courses, that there's really sort of this dearth of active discussion about what we teach, how we teach it, and then assessing student performance when we teach statistical thinking in biology courses. And so we've noticed some, in particular, some gaps. And so I'm going to run through these now, again, to kind of motivate what we're trying to do. That one of the gaps we noticed is that the discussions about quantitative thinking in undergraduate biology often blurs the lines between what we would call mathematical or deductive thinking and statistical or inductive thinking. So the idea of how do we draw conclusions from data, which is inductive reasoning based on our observations, try to draw broad conclusions, versus a more mathematical and deductive, here's a mathematical principle about growth rates of bacteria and it takes this exponential sort of distribution. So how do you line up sort of the math and the statistics? And those are obviously complementary. But quantitative thinking in biology often kind of blurs the lines between those. We see that being one gap, sort of an unrecognized opportunity to draw some contrast there. Another gap is that often we've seen that when statistical topics are taught in an undergraduate biology course, it's more of a means to an end. So because it's a biology course, they're saying, well, we're going to use data to draw conclusions, and here's a technique. So here's an algorithm, push these buttons on the computer or in the calculator, and you're going to get a p-value. And if your p-value is less than 0.05, you're going to draw this conclusion. If it's not, you're going to draw this other conclusion. And so by reducing some of the techniques down to more algorithms and tools and recipes, we see an opportunity to sort of a missed opportunity in that there's a lack of drawing conclusions about the overall process of drawing conclusions from data, and also failing to see the connections between biology courses and statistics courses, where maybe those statistics courses are more big picture and conceptual, and the biology courses sort of reducing things down a bit. In an understandable way, because as we've talked to biologists, I'll come back to this more in a minute, the overarching concepts that they want to communicate in biology are not necessarily the statistical ones. So gap number 3, many of the efforts to assist the teaching of statistical topics in undergraduate biology courses don't assist instructors. And so it's, we need to do more of this, but then there's not necessarily the resources there that say, here's how to do this well. So biology instructors, here's how to do this well, best practices on the way we teach statistics in those biology courses. So 3 more gaps that we've recognized. There's a lack of clarity and agreement about what statistical learning objectives there should be. So there's some momentum on this in that AP Biology sort of driven some of the discussion to say, okay, we're going to do some things with descriptive statistics and some things with chi-square tests. But beyond that, there's a lot of questions. And so people are doing different things and trying different things. And so we see that as an opportunity to maybe sync up a little bit better what's going on in undergraduate biology so that we can have more of a national conversation about best practices. Another gap is that some of the things in statistics education in terms of best practices, when we think about the GAZE guidelines, or in particular some of what Beth and I and others have been part of with simulation-based methods and how these have the opportunity to improve student understanding, really haven't been widely considered for use in undergraduate biology courses. So we see that as an opportunity as well. And then lastly, little efforts been made to assist instructors in assessing statistical thinking in undergraduate biology courses. So we're doing things in the courses now more than we've done before, but there's really sort of a lack of understanding of what's actually making a difference. Are some of these new things that are being taught in biology courses helping student understanding in statistics as well, not only their conceptual understanding of the statistical principles, but also their attitudes, student attitudes towards statistics or reasoning with data. And so recognizing some of these gaps in the conversation, we are fortunate to get some funding from the National Science Foundation through a program called the Research Coordination Network with a focus on undergraduate biology education. And this is the RCN UBE program to essentially address some of these gaps. We have a steering committee with 5 different institutions represented, trying to get a diverse set of institutions. And then from each of those institutions, making sure we have at least one statistician and at least one biologist to help us sort of in this interdisciplinary conversation that we're having. In particular, then, we've recognized sort of 4 distinct goals of the network to develop some freely available modules and assessment items for teaching, and then sort of disseminate those out, to publish some articles on teaching best practices and assessment results, really to have a long-lasting improvement in the teaching of statistical thinking in undergraduate biology. And then also on the statistics side, so we've focused a lot on what's going on in biology courses, but also have introductory statistics courses better reflect the needs and perspectives of biology and other quantitative science students. So in other words, what does it look like coming back towards the introductory statistics curriculum? How does that get impacted by what we've learned about what's going on in the biology courses? So this past year, and kind of our inaugural year of the project, sort of just getting going on some things, we hosted 3 workshops. The first one I would say is sort of the most traditional workshop. It was a 1.5-day workshop held out in beautiful Morro Bay, California back in September. We had all of our steering committee there, so those 5 institutions represented, plus a number of other institutions around the state of California. Typically, each of the institutions that came had at least one statistician and at least one biologist come. This allowed us to really have an interdisciplinary conversation, which was awesome. One of the things we did in the workshop was talked about the GAZE guidelines and talked about simulation-based inference, which frankly for a lot of the biologists in the room and some of the statisticians as well was new. The GAZE guidelines, as many of you may know, are sort of standards that are put out there. Guidelines, I guess, would be a better way of saying it, since that's what's in the acronym. Guidelines that are out there on how to assess and instruct students in introductory statistics courses. We also talked about simulation-based inference and what that was and how we see that as a way to help students improve their conceptual understanding of statistical techniques. We also had some of the biologists talk about what's going on in biology, what's changing in biology, how it's becoming more quantitative, and then I shared some specific biological examples and data sets that really illustrate statistical thinking well, or at least where statistics plays a major role in understanding it. So for example, in a lot of genetic data sets, there's a lot of statistics and a lot of other applications as well, ecology and such. Another thing we did in that workshop was set the stage for sort of the network and network goals, material development, and assessment activities. So we tried to say, okay, we're at the front end of this, we wrote this stuff in the grant. How does this actually look? What are our priorities? And so we got some great feedback there. We also started developing some preliminary materials, and probably the most exciting kind of roll up our sleeves, actually do some work at a workshop kind of activities. We broke into small interdisciplinary groups by institution. And so we were able to partner with people that, even if we didn't know those folks real well, we at least had a passing sort of, acquaintance with those individuals, and shared what was going on in our statistics courses, what was going on in our biology courses, and then said, well, if we were going to jointly develop some content that could be used in a biology course, how would we do that? And so we started doing that. We're going to see some examples of that here in a few minutes. So we did that in September, and then later in the fall, in November, and again in December, we held a couple of, we called them workshops, shorter workshops, and so a couple hours at Project Kaleidoscope in Atlanta, and about an hour or so at the American Society of Cell Biology conference. These were more sort of dissemination focused, so at a typical conference, people just came to these longer, extended sessions because they were called workshops, but not a day and a half long, just an hour or two long, to hear about what we were doing and give feedback on what we had done so far, really in the first workshop. And so, we sort of talk to those people who show up. These are more sort of dissemination focused, kind of respond to the materials we have, and then also recruited them into an assessment project that you'll hear Beth talk about here in a couple minutes. And we do envision then sort of having more of these workshops as we go. So at the end of this webinar, we'll take some time during our Q&A to come back and kind of get your feedback on a number of things. One of those is, how do you think we should do future workshops? Where do you see those opportunities, both in terms of conferences and strategic sort of institutions and such? So let me kind of pull back and say, okay, so we've done a few of these workshops. What have we learned so far? I would say that I was really excited as a statistician talking to biologists, especially at our first workshop, about how receptive biologists were to both the gaze lines as well as simulation-based inference. And in fact, I would say I was excited by some of the wow factor from the simulation-based inference approach and what we heard from biologists saying, wow, like I actually see how that could help my students understand what's going on behind a chi-square distribution, right? And so simulation-based inference is a way to kind of, through simulation, get a much clearer sense of sampling distributions by keeping students close to the data and doing permutation tests. And so that was really exciting to see that kind of reception, because frankly, I just wasn't sure how non-statistical educators would respond. And so that was really encouraging. I also thought we got some great context from biologists. As a statistician coming to, well, okay, I'm going to grab a biology data set. I've got my own biases in what I'm looking for. And usually I'm looking for a data set that illustrates very well a statistical principle. And so I might need to massage the data, really dig and find one. And so biologists were able to say, this is the kind of stuff we need to talk about with our biology students. And so let that drive the statistical thinking, as opposed to letting the statistical concept help me sort of find a good data set. We were able to develop some good sample materials that were ready to be class tested. It was exciting to sort of then bridge those two, where we said, okay, here's some good context, some good data sets that biologists are already using or want to use in their classes. What kind of statistical thinking can we illustrate with those data sets that align with what the biologists want to do? And then kind of linking that together and developing some sample materials that are in the process of being class tested. We'd love to have more people using them. We'll share those with you here in just a couple minutes. I think I really appreciated the interdisciplinary teams, are real strength. It was funny, about 15 years ago when I started teaching, one of the biologists at my institution had talked to me and honestly planted a seed for a lot of what we're sharing with you here, just saying, man, we need to do a better job of talking between statisticians and biologists, because I'm doing more statistics in my course and I feel like I'm not doing a good job. And even just having a day and a half workshop set aside on the calendar to focus on this, I think just really brought to light how valuable that time is. And it's so hard. We always say it's something that's a priority. Yeah, we need to work better with those folks in the other departments and develop materials together and sync up our courses and our learning objectives. But it's really hard to find the time to do it and prioritize it. And so that was really exciting to me. I think another lesson learned is that these shorter workshops that we've been doing at conferences are really more about dissemination than actually rolling up our sleeves and doing work. And so I think I've been impacted to think we're going to need to do a mix and not think that we're going to get very much quote unquote work done in terms of material development, you know, in an hour or 2 hour period, that we're going to need those longer workshops to do that well. And not surprising to me, but I think nevertheless, one of those things that is sort of in forefront on my mind since the fall is how do we follow up post-workshop with people? So I just mentioned how awesome it was to sit down with my biology colleagues and roll up our sleeves and develop some materials together. And then after the workshop ends, it's very hard to kind of get people refocused on those things. And so it's like, well, we'll do X, Y, and Z when the workshop's over, and that'll be easy and quick. And then 3 or 4 months pass, and easy and quick turns into, I don't remember what I was supposed to do. So I think that we're also looking for sort of best practices and ways to help keep people talking. We've got some ideas about that, but I think that's something we're going to be sort of thinking about here in the days and months ahead. So that's some feedback on the workshops we've done already. I think I'm going to turn things over to Beth now, and she's going to talk a little bit about some of the other activities that we've been participating in here over the last few months. So, Beth?
Yes, thank you. And these are very preliminary activities that we're just getting started on. But of course, one will be assessing the students and what they're learning about statistics and their attitudes towards statistics in these biology courses. And so first, we're just looking to kind of get some benchmarks about what statistical concepts they're discussing and how much they can gain on their understanding of those concepts within the biology course, but then also their attitudes towards statistics. Eventually, we like to be able to make comparisons, use some items that we've also been using with our introductory statistics students that we have a lot of data on, and kind of see, are they getting similar ideas? Are they making similar types of misconceptions in those two environments? And maybe even down to the very specific types of questions that we're asking them. And then also questions like, which students have had an introductory statistics course already? Does that help them better understand how the statistics is applying to their biology material? Or would seeing that application in the biology course help them better understand the statistics when they take that course second? And so we've just begun recruiting people for giving some common assessment questions. There are some questions out there that have been developed by biologists, and there's lots of questions out there that have been developed by statisticians. And so I think we're still trying to have those common conversations and deciding what both groups think are important and what both groups think are valid assessment items. We would like to develop some assessments that could be given before and after even just a particular module or at the beginning and the end of the course to look at student growth, as well as conducting an instructor survey to kind of see what their knowledge and opinions about the utility of statistics and how that might be impacting what their students are getting out of the material as well. And the next slide, we're also trying to increase or establish an online presence. We do have a website set up through CauseWeb that we're just beginning to put materials on. There will be a blog there for online discussions. We do have a few sample materials there already, as well as announcements of the workshops and hopefully reports of the workshops. And then as we develop the assessment items and collect the data and being able to share the results of the data across the different institutions, that will be shared on the webpage as well. And so just to give you an example, some of the sample materials are there. The chi-square activity is one that kind of our group developed as an example of using simulation-based inference in a biology context that might be relevant to the biology students that they could be using in a class. There were some existing activities based on some research that Nathan's been doing with fatty acids and genetics. And then an example of one of the activities that was developed at the Morro Bay workshop. So again, what they were able to put together when they had that day and a half meeting together in one location. And then to share my own personal experience here at Cal Poly, we were able to meet during that Morro Bay workshop and then identify a lab activity that was already being used in some of the introductory biology courses where they were collecting some data. This particular context was on a plant signaling and how you can change what happens depending on what you do to certain stems. So I needed a lot of education on how that was working. And in fact, one of the things that we needed to think about is how to collect measurements so that the data we collected would be simple enough to analyze, but still meaningful to analyze. And so we had to talk a lot about, well, maybe not doing as much repeated measures on the same plant and thinking more about, a simpler data set that would be more straightforward to analyze. But basically, they're saying they'd been doing this lab for a while and they'd been collecting this data and pretty much not doing anything with it. Partly it was just very messy data, partly they didn't have the time in class to do it. So we met several times with the course instructors and the lead TA, and one of the main things we added was a lot more focus on the experimental design and coming up with a common protocol that would be used across different lab sections, trying to improve the quality of the data and also the consistency of the data. One thing that allowed us to do is pool some of the responses across different student groups, so then we could have a bigger data set to analyze. And then we used simulation-based inference. They were actually willing to use one of our labs to do a simulation test for a 2-sample t-test to see how to analyze the data, and even being willing to stop there and just say, how do we decide if this is convincing evidence that this mechanism was causing a change in the plant behavior? Another thing we did that I think was very valuable is I was able to go and meet with the 6 or 7 graduate student TAs who are going to be leading all these individual labs. And so we were able to go through the applet and go through the worksheet together to see what both groups thought were important things to be focusing on, answer some of the questions about using the applet, some things that maybe were hidden to the applet if somebody was just using it for the first time. And so then they were able to do that in their courses just a couple weeks ago, and we're still looking at the student performance and attitudes after doing that. So I think that gets us to the question and answer period. So just a few of the things we would love to hear your feedback on, or other things to ask questions about. As Nathan mentioned, the workshop format, ideas for assessment questions that we could be using, better ways to utilize and develop and disseminate the materials, and just spreading the word. We find us statisticians going to biology conferences maybe doesn't get too many interested people. Us going to statistics conferences isn't going to get to the biology educators. And so what are some good mechanisms for helping get these groups together and getting these conversations going?
Awesome, thanks, Beth. And yeah, so I think we'll start transitioning to our Q&A time, and so you can type your questions in there, and we'll try to do what we can. But like I said, either ask questions or respond to some of these discussion questions we have for you. One of the things I'll mention while we're waiting for some of the questions to come in, I know one of the things we've heard from a few people are just about some of the other groups that are out there. Some of the other NSF-funded projects, HHMI-funded projects, the teaching section on or teaching health statistics section on teaching health statistics. There we go, as part of the ASA. And I think as we get more of our identity in this network going, we'll be able to better see how we're filling a niche, but also then better collaborate. So I know, like even on the cause website, there are some activities that are out there, free activities from the teaching statistics in the health sciences already, and so how are those developed, and how can we kind of share materials between the different networks and things is certainly something on our radar.
Okay, thanks to Beth and Nathan for that. And for those of you who are attending, if you have any questions, there is a questions tab that you can go to and type those in. One question so far is from Eric. He's wondering if you have any workshops coming up in 2019. Are you guys doing something at USCOTS in May, or what other things do you have on the schedule so far?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that our schedule for 2019 is emerging. We have a few options. We are going to be in October down in the combination of the American Society of Human Genetics and the International Genetic Epidemiology Society meetings. That's a for sure. In the fall, I think we're exploring another workshop where we would probably do a more geographically targeted one, like the Morro Bay workshop, where we pick a site and we try to recruit from local universities and institutions there, so not tied to a conference necessarily. Our plan was to do about 3 of these workshops per year over a 5-year period, but we can certainly sort of flux that up or down as opportunities present themselves. We do have a few other opportunities pending where we put in, proposals for workshops, and so some of those are sort of still under evaluation. But yeah, I'd love to hear more thoughts from all of you about where you think both geographically would be good to do these, as well as at other conferences. And in particular, I would say, we'd love to hear, one of the nice things about Morro Bay was, well, we had already things going at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and we knew that there were some other biologists in the Cal State system that were interested in some of this. And so it was nice to say, okay, we can go to a place we think we're going to have, easily 20 people without sort of working real hard to advertise. And so if any of you have similar sort of connections at networks, geographically sort of situated networks of institutions, we'd love to sort of explore partnering with you to do an on-site workshop.
And I will be attending US COTS, but we're not doing anything official there, but I'd love to meet with people and talk with people if you're interested.
Okay. So if someone has at their university some kind of group already going, you guys would be interested in coming out and doing some kind of workshop with an existing group even?
Absolutely. I think that's one place where we can really, have some bang for the buck in the sense of, help hopefully come alongside existing efforts if they're synergistic with what we're trying to accomplish and really sort of move things ahead. Yeah, and have some more of those case studies like Beth shared where there was some momentum gained and then they were able to really carry that out at San Luis Obispo over the next 6 months after the workshop. I think that'd be awesome. Yeah.
John's asking, is there a goal for X number of projects for the Bio 101 curriculum? Do you think you have it covered with the labs that are posted now?
Oh, I don't think we have it covered with what's posted now. I'd say what's posted now is really just a kind of a taste, I would say. I think our goal would be, especially over the next 2 to 3 years, kind of here on the front half of our efforts, to really ramp that up. Do I have a number in mind? No, not particularly. I mean, I think that once we get a few more, we'll probably want to step back with some of our biologist colleagues, either on the steering committee or at some of the workshops, and say, where do you see the gaps, right? In terms of what are you doing in class? Where are some of the gaps in our materials? We tried to just sort of say at this point, kind of just a shotgun approach, for individual biologists, where do you want something so that we can try this out, test it, get it into the classroom. But yeah, I guess off the top of my head, I mean, something on the order of 15 to 20 would be great that covered a variety of different learning objectives. As Beth alluded to earlier, I think we also ultimately want to tie some assessments to those so that an instructor could say, I'm going to try this in my class, and here's some assessment questions that I'm going to do with my students to see if students are actually getting it. And then if we can, we're hoping to coordinate some of that assessment data across institutions to say, are we actually sort of moving the dial on student learning in a broader way, not just one section of at one institution.
If I could add a little bit, I think also we want to have a little bit of a teacher's guide component to it as well. So some discussion of the activities, but also these kind of case studies that, as Nathan referred to them, where we can say, sure, this was a lab on this specific biology event, which you may or may not have in your class. But these were the important issues that needed to be resolved to kind of enhance it. That could be applied anytime you want to maybe just do a 2-group comparison. And kind of having that discussion more globally as well and kind of documented, as well as the assessment and the feedback. So here's how I would build on students who are maybe still having this misconception, and having it not just be a summative evaluation, but formative as well. And I should have mentioned, we did develop some homework follow-up questions to our activity where they were using the applet to look at the effective sample size and the effective variability in the data. But then also, how do you give feedback to students to move on from there?
Okay, a couple of more questions. Seth has 2. Where are you presenting this work? At conferences like AERA that are more interdisciplinary? And then also, are you working with research on kids learning about measurement, since measurement is such an important idea in science, but can often fall outside of a statistics class's scope?
That's a good point. I'll take the first part. Maybe Beth, you can grab the second part. In terms of interdisciplinary conferences, I'll jot AERA down. I think that's come up before, but I'll just add an extra little checkbox by that. One of the other ones is AAAS. That just came on our radar not that long ago. So I think we're going to try to see if we can get in there. We've heard that that's a pretty good interdisciplinary sort of conference. Actually, Project Kaleidoscope, I don't know if you've heard about that. That was actually one of our attempts this past year to go to a more interdisciplinary conference that's sort of science education and learning in general. And, I don't know whether it's the conference venue or whatever. I mean, we didn't have huge numbers of people come. And so we've got to think harder about how we market it, but then also what those right venues are. So we'd love to hear more ideas from all of you about good interdisciplinary conferences. I think one of the challenges that I see, though, from an operational standpoint is, often at those conferences, you don't have a team that would include both a biologist and a statistician at the same conference. But I agree that it can create a really good sort of rich discussion at the conference itself, where you have maybe statisticians from one institution and biologists from another institution trading ideas and talking together.
So along with that, before Beth goes on to the question about measurement, Stephanie was saying there's the abstracts for SABRE are due on Friday this week. So I don't know what that is, but I'm guessing that's probably one of those conferences that you might be interested in.
Perfect. R-E or E-R on the SABRE?
SABER.
Thank you. We will take a look at that. Definitely. Yes, I'll use Google. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I...
She said the Society for the Advancement of Biology Education Research.
Perfect. So, sounds like an awesome opportunity.
That does sound like a good one. Go ahead, Beth.
Yeah, I don't know that I have much to add. I mean, that's exactly why we're trying to get the word out and get this feedback. I mean, these are all great ideas, and hearing from the biologists what they're concerned about. I mean, just those conversations where we said, oh, well, we call it this, and this is what we get concerned about, was just so illuminating. And so just partly looking for those opportunities to get those groups of people together and have productive meetings. And I think measurement is a great example of where we see it very different ways, and we really need to be in the same room together to get more of a common vision.
Yeah,
okay.
I'll just piggyback on that, Beth. What you just said made me think of something from my own personal research experience working with biologists. And I worked with a microbiologist and a bioinformatician and myself as a biostatistician. And honestly, I think it was the first year and a half was almost all spent just developing a common language so that we could dig into the research. And while that was a highly technical project, I do think it's illustrative of the fact that, as Beth said, even when we're just talking about introductory biology and introductory statistics, there is time needed to develop that common language so that we can have a productive discussion. So, great point.
One other suggestion, the Lilly conference at Miami of Ohio, the home of stats and stories. Maybe there's another place you could go.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, again, thanks to both of you for presenting today. Thanks to all of you for coming to our 200th cause webinar. I was very excited to be a part of that today. Was going to try to find like some champagne popping gifts or something, but didn't quite get around to that one. We do have a webinar coming up in April that will be held at a different time because our presenter is going to be presenting from Korea, and we needed to find a time where we were both awake. And then we also have some coming up throughout, probably will not have one in May, but then throughout the summer have some scheduled as well. So please keep your eye on your email or the CauseWeb website to get registered for all of those. And that's it. So thanks, and everybody, I hope you have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.